What should the Bengals do with Tee Higgins? We know Joe Burrow wants to keep him in Cincinnati long term. The Bengals have options. Let's explore each of those options and see if there's an obvious solution to the Tee dilemma that the Bengals are having right now on Cincinnati Bengals Talk. Hi again, everyone, and welcome into CBT. I'm James Rapien of BengalsTalk.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and today's video brought to you by BetUS. Also, make sure that you check us out wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Apple, whether that's Spotify, whether that is Amazon. And let's dive into it. Because Tee Higgins, there's the dilemma. And it's not much of a dilemma for me, but I do see the arguments for the other sides of keeping Tee. I'm very much in the Joe Burrow, Tee Higgins corner, where it's like, yeah, you keep Tee. Obviously, you keep Tee. He's 26 years old, has played at a high level, is a big part of what you do, is part of your identity, and the list goes on and on. But there's a lot of you that say, no, don't keep Tee. You have Ja'Marr, pay Joe, use Tee's money elsewhere. Okay, well, let's start here. Let's say the Bengals let Tee Higgins walk. Well, they don't really have a lot to show for it if he walks. Maybe a compensatory draft selection next draft in 2026, but that would be kind of unfortunate because it means that they didn't add a ton in free agency to kind of cancel out what they would lose with Tee from a compensatory draft standpoint and compensatory pick formula. So one, it wouldn't help this offseason. Two, doesn't make sense. So I'm going to rule that one out. It shouldn't happen. Tee Higgins should not get to free agency. He's a 26-year-old wide receiver that just had 10 touchdowns, a career high in 12 games. And everyone talks about his injury history, but he just had a career high 10 touchdowns in 12 games. And so you can't let that walk out the door. Part of why you can't let that walk out the door is what's available or not available in free agency. I look at these wide receivers, and it would be one thing if you're like, oh yeah, let Tee Higgins walk, but you can find a suitable replacement for 10 million or 12 million that you're going to be really confident in. Let me read the free agents that are available. 31-year-old Stephon Diggs coming off of a torn ACL. 33-year-old Keenan Allen, who clearly lost a step last year for the Bears. Amari Cooper, 31 years old, couldn't catch on in Buffalo after getting traded. 29-year-old Chris Godwin coming off of a torn ACL. 32-year-old Brandon Cooks. 29-year-old Deontay Johnson, who's been on 52 teams over the past year. A DeAndre Hopkins, who's 33 years old and tripped with not the game on the line, but certainly had a huge drop in Super Bowl 59. I guess you could go with Mike Williams, who's going to be 31 years old and didn't do as much for Pittsburgh as you'd want. I know a lot of people said Darius Slayton, the 28-year-old from the Giants. I don't see anyone there that I love. And I think that's the element here. If you let Tee Higgins walk, he is clearly far and away the best wide receiver available, period. And I think he has value. And so you don't let value get out the door. You don't let value leave in free agency for nothing. Now, the tag and trade versus the extension, we can have a discussion about. And I think that's where that's what it comes down to. Because Tee Higgins is by far the best available wide receiver right now that is set to be a free agent. And so why would you let him, especially when this wide receiver draft class isn't as good as last year's, why would you let him just walk? It would be poor management, a poor use of resources, a failure if the Bengals just let Tee Higgins walk and test free agency. By the way, the franchise tag window opens on February 18th, so the Bengals can make that decision as early as February 18th. It runs through March 4th, so hopefully we have a decision before the Combine in late February. February 18th is next week, so buckle up. We'll know then. But should they tag and trade him? Should they tag and extend him? Should they just get an extension done right now? Let's discuss that. Let's pursue that. We will do that and have that discussion coming up next. Today's video is brought to you by BetUS. BetUS is the one-stop shop for all things sports wagering, whether it's the NBA, and look, I'm wearing my Mamba shirt, and whether it's the NBA and Luka Doncic, LeBron James, and the Lakers, or all things baseball. Opening day is right around the corner. Ellie De La Cruz, Terry Francona, and the Reds trying to get the Reds to the playoffs. Maybe you like the Reds to hit the over this year, regardless of what you're thinking. Maybe you're thinking you want to play a little blackjack. BetUS has that as well. All you have to do is go to BetUS.com, use code YouTube150. You'll get a 150% bonus on your first deposit up to $2,000. That's free money. Take advantage of it, whether it's in the casino, whether it's sports betting, right now by going to BetUS.com and using code YouTube150. Should the Bengals tag and trade Tee Higgins? Should they sign him long term? That's a dilemma that I think a lot of Bengals fans would go back and forth about. And I get it. I do. Because I do think that on paper, you could say, well, you have an elite wide receiver. You have an elite quarterback. You can take this luxury item away, Tee Higgins, and build a more sustainable roster. I understand that argument. And I think there are a lot of people that feel that way. What I would say is, knowing how the Bengals have done all of these things, you have a 26-year-old Tee Higgins, and you know what he brings. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of people that say, oh, well, he never plays. He's played at least 12 games in every single year of his career, at least 12. He's been healthy for the playoff runs. He had 14 starts, 12 games, 11 starts, and then this year had 12 games, 9 starts. And the starts are silly because he's obviously playing starter level snaps. But the point is, he's played in 70 games over the past 5 seasons. It's not like he's just missing every single game or something like that and missing huge chunks of the year. But what I think is interesting in the dilemma here is, all right, well, what is the alternative path? I don't want the Bengals roster is probably not going to be perfect going into 2025. When they report to camp in late July, there's probably going to be something that irks you. And that's okay. I think there were 31 teams that were irked by something on their roster this year. The one that wasn't was the Eagles. It's very rare. The Chiefs won back-to-back Super Bowls. I don't think that they were anywhere close to perfect from a roster standpoint. So what the Bengals have to ask themselves is, if they tag T and trade him, will that make them significantly better or better in 2025, 2026, 2027, in this window? The time to win is now. It's not this long-term view where you're accumulating assets and you're trying to figure it out and piece together. This cannot be a rebuild. Joe Burrow's playing too well. Ja'Marr Chase is playing too well. Trey Hendrickson, who we'll do a video on this week, is playing too well. And so how does trading T make you better now? And a lot of people would say, well, obviously, it gives you more money for guard. It gives you more money for defensive line, for the secondary, for linebacker, for all these things. I can't see the path unless they just nailed it with an awesome wide receiver in the draft. And we haven't gotten to the draft much. But the path to making that work and being significantly better on offense, it's just really hard. It makes it really tough. They have to thread the needle even more. You know, everyone talks about how small the Bengals front office is. And, oh, man, the scouting department and all of these things. We know Tee Higgins is really, really good. If you go behind the unknown door, which I get, I understand the logic of it, and I'm not against taking risks at all in the right circumstance, but this is a risk that you just don't need to take. I look at Tee Higgins and I say, man, he's going to get you 1,000 yards every year that he's playing 14 games. And if he doesn't play every single game, well, that's all right, because you can get by. But there are going to be teams, if he does get to free agency, he might get, and I'm serious about this, the Justin Jefferson deal. Because there's going to be so many teams competing for his services. He's far and away the best option available this offseason. And so $30 million. The Steelers, Patriots, there'll be a dozen teams that offer him $30 million per year. And so then these teams are going to try to one-up each other. If you got to have him, why wouldn't you offer him 4 for $140 and say, let's just get him here and we'll figure out the rest later? Here's 4 for $140, Tee Higgins. Would not shock me one bit if that happens. So if you're the Bengals, the path would be, all right, you franchise tag T, you trade him, and you use those resources at other positions. But that's such a void, such a gap, such a big hole on your offense. that you're talking about a first-round wide receiver. And if you're prepared to do that, and you're okay with that, with this wide receiver class at this moment, then fine. Because you got to have your mind made up, I would say, before the NFL Combine. When you go to Indianapolis, if you're trying to trade Tee Higgins, that's when you're going to have those talks. That's when you're going to have those discussions. That's when you're going to put that little bird out into the air. A couple of years ago, when Orlando Brown Jr. ended up in Cincinnati, when did it leak? When did it come out that the Chiefs, they weren't going to tag him a second time? In Indianapolis. They should have, by the way. I think they could have used him in Super Bowl 59. But the point is the point. It's going to be really, really hard to thread that needle and get better without Tee Higgins. I would pay him. It's not a shock. I would offer him 4 for 100. I think he would take it. And if that's not enough, then you go to 4 for 108 or something in that range, which is $27 million per year. Really, really reasonable. Obviously, you tag him. You don't let him hit the market, test the market. And when you do that, it'll be a $26 million cap hit directly. But the moment you sign him to an extension, that cap hit will drop. So that's what I would do. I would pay T. I understand the argument to not, but in this wide receiver climate, and I am a wide receiver guy, I love wide receivers. The idea of drafting one, if there was a Brian Thomas in this draft that was very much obviously going to be there at pick 17, like last year, you knew Brian Thomas would be there at pick 18, but you're taking Amarius Mims over Thomas. This year, I don't think it's that clear cut. And there could be some good wide receivers there, but it might not be the ideal outside T replacement. And you need that outside threat so you can move Ja'Marr Chase all over. You need that outside guy. He's valuable. Joe wants him. It's a whole nother part of this as well. Joe Burrow certainly watching. Tee Higgins entering his prime. I think his best football is coming now. I really do. And Tee Higgins, I would pay him. I would sign him. Like I said, PFF projects him at 4 years, 112. He will crush that. I promise you he will crush that if he gets the free agency. But if you can get him for that here, after he switches agents, after he clearly wants to be in Cincinnati, I say do it. What do you say? Leave a comment on YouTube. Make sure you check us out wherever you get your podcast. That's Apple, that's Spotify, that's Amazon. Leave us a 5-star review on all of our audio platforms. And if you missed Enter the Jungle this week, make sure you check it out because we did react to T. We talked about Trey's future, and we also talked about Super Bowl 59 as well. This video brought to you by BetUS. For Andrew Fox-Miller, I'm James Rapien. Thank you so much for watching and listening to Cincinnati Bengals Talk.
Patrick Mahomes dapped up his guys, but skipped Samaje Perine. I thought that was going to be...
Yeah, what is that, man?
I don't know. I watched that clip I don't know how many times. Everybody's like, oh, no, he might have been busy in his thoughts. He might have been praying something, and Patrick Mahomes didn't want to interrupt him. He stood up.
Yes.
They're like, oh, he skipped other guys. Yeah, but they were looking down. They didn't even acknowledge the situation. Samaje stood up like he was being greeted, and nothing.